watching your calories and why we want to do calorie restriction, optimal nutrition. He talks about how they did a study at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And this study was done over 20 years on primates or monkeys. And what they found is during the 20 years of the study, half of the animals or half of the monkeys were permitted to eat freely. No, all the monkeys, I'm sorry, were permitted to eat freely, but only half of the monkeys survived. And he said, well, 80% of the monkeys were given the same foods, but were restricted as far as the calories were concerned. They cut the calories back. There was a 30% fewer calorie. And it says that those monkeys that were given the 30% fewer calories are still alive today. So what he mentions also is that there was no diabetes, complete prevention of diabetes in the monkeys where they did the 30% fewer calories. But with the monkeys that were allowed to eat anything they wanted to, the incidence of cancerous tumors and cardiovascular disease on this diet doubled the incidence of cancer, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. So we can see that just doing that simple thing by restricting our calories, that it will make such a huge difference for us. We can see it in animals too. Interesting that I know that years ago when I was little, we never heard of animals getting cancer. Now it's very prevalent, and I often wondered why. And me having a cat myself, I realized that food is available to our cat 24/7. Our cat can have food anytime he wants it. And he's an indoor cat. He's a little overweight. But this is going to be true of us also. So besides us, we have to think about how is this affecting our children and our animals too, that we usually love very much. So we want to make sure that for us we are thinking about this calorie restriction. So CRON, or calorie restriction, optimal nutrition, means that everything we put in our mouth has to be nutritious. We want to make sure that we are thinking before we are eating. Everything that we put in our mouth, we want to make sure has optimal nutrition. The other thing that we want to consider too, in Dr. Strand's book, Healthy for Life, he talks about RRBS. RRBS stands for rapid rise in blood sugar. And in his information, he talks about what happens whenever we have rapid rise in blood sugar. And actually he calls it insulin abuse. So when we think about rapid rise in blood sugar, what that tells us is that because obesity has become an epidemic in the United States, only here, not in other countries, we have to look at why this is happening. And I talked about this metabolic syndrome or syndrome X, and that is whenever our glucose levels go high and we don't even realize that it's happening. The question is, how does that happen? Well, for one thing, with the old RDA for the food pyramid, you'll notice that it tells us that we are supposed to get 6 grains a day. But what most people don't know is that a serving of pasta, for example, is only 1/4 of a cup. So 1 serving of pasta is 1/4 of a cup, according to the USRDA. We don't ever eat 1/4 of a cup of pasta. When you think about pasta, or you think about pizza, so when you go to a restaurant and you order spaghetti, how much spaghetti do you get? Is it ever 1/4 of a cup? It never is. You're usually getting about 5 servings of pasta in that dish. The other thing that we do whenever we eat that pasta is we usually have what that goes along with it. We have bread. So the bread, or the grain, that flour, in that bread is just like eating, you might as well just eat teaspoons of table sugar. The same with the spaghetti. So those pastas, according to Change Your Brain, Change Your Body, according to Dr. Strand's book, Healthy Life, Healthy for Life, in these books, they talk about this is what is happening here in the United States, is that we are overeating our carbs and we don't even have a clue that we are doing this to ourselves and to our children. So our diet usually consists of, grains for breakfast, grains for lunch, grains for dinner. But those grains, like for example, if we have the spaghetti and the bread together, what will happen is that will cause a major rise in our blood sugar. So our glucose goes up. So it signals the brain, the hypothalamus. It says, okay, look, I've got all this sugar in here. Then the hypothalamus tells the pancreas, look, the beta cells are going to have to release insulin to get rid of that glucose. Well, what we don't realize is that we do this meal after meal after meal. We raise our blood sugar levels. The hypothalamus signals the beta cells in the pancreas to release insulin. The insulin comes to the area, but because we do this over and over and over and over again, it's called rapid rise in blood sugar. It's actually considered an insulin abuse, is what Dr. Strand talks about. Insulin abuse is whenever we have two heavy carbs together, and I'm talking about not carbs like your apples, because apples and fruit have fiber in them that slows down the absorption of that sugar. I'm talking about these straight carbs where you're going to have your spaghetti, or you're going to have your bread, your white rice. These are the carbs that will cause rapid rise in blood sugar. But let's say that you eat the spaghetti, you have some bread with it, and then you have sweet tea or a soda, or you also have dessert. What that does is it raises that blood sugar so drastically that the body has a hard time compensating for that. And that is what's considered insulin abuse. Well, if you're like me, nobody taught me that. We didn't learn that in school. We're not getting that information when we go to restaurants. So for a lot of people, this is new information. So we want to be aware of what we're doing and what we're eating simply because of that fact. Once we cause that rapid rise in blood sugar over and over and over for years and years and years, we develop metabolic syndrome or syndrome X. So that actually puts you into a pre-diabetic state before we even know it. So why is this important? The reason why this is important is because when you have that rapid rise in blood sugar, what happens is the sugar courses through the blood vessels. It's very acidic. Sugar is very acidic. As it courses through the blood vessels as an acid, it irritates those blood vessels. When it gets to the blood vessels and the little capillary beds that are in your toes and in your feet, in your legs, those little capillary beds respond to that glucose or that sugar that's coursing through the blood by producing macrophages and killer T cells, brings in extra fluid, because it picks it up as inflammation. It actually causes inflammation because it's an irritant in those blood vessels, in those capillary beds. It's very much an irritant. So the body says, okay, we have to do something about the inflammation. So just like whenever you hit your elbow or you get a cut, you will have inflammation in that area. You know it because you see the black and blue mark, or you see that you have a cut and it hurts. And you know that your immune system is going to go to work right away, and it's going to start bringing in more macrophages, some B cells, T cells, and it's going in leukocytes, and it's going to start repairing that or trying to repair that. Well, what's the other thing that happens is that you get swelling with that. And you realize that because there's extra fluid coming in there bringing extra calcium in, bringing in all the macrophages, and there's extra water that builds up around there, extra fluid, and that causes a swelling. The same thing happens in our capillaries, in our blood vessels that are in our toes and in our feet, and in our hands and fingers. When we have a lot of sugar, or when we eat these high unopposed carbs with no fiber, that will make this sugar that acts like an acid to course through our blood vessels as an irritant, as an acid, and then it causes inflammation in the blood vessels. So therefore there's swelling that happens. So then when the brain says, okay, we have too much sugar in the system, it releases the insulin. The insulin courses through the blood. It tries to get to those capillary beds that are in the toes and in the feet. But guess what? There's too much swelling, and the insulin cannot get through. It can't get through to the area where it needs to go. The trucks are backed up, and it's almost like there is a traffic jam. So it's like the trucks are backed up, they can't get through to those capillary beds in the toes and the feet. So the glucose stays there and just continues to cause inflammation. One of the first ways that we can perceive that a person is getting pre-diabetes is we do something called thermography, and it picks up heat in the body. And a person who's getting or developing metabolic syndrome or syndrome X, in that thermography, their hands will be heated up in red, because the thermography is a scan that picks up internal heat. And on the thermography, their hands will be red. It will show a lot of heat in the capillary beds, but also in their feet. That's where the heat's going to show up, in this thermography. Not anywhere else in the body, just in their hands and their feet. And then we'll get the radiologist who reads the thermography will send us a report that says metabolic syndrome. Well, the person has no clue that they're even experiencing anything like that. So their glucose levels, usually whenever we review their diet, we find that they're doing Starbucks, they're doing a lot of sugars that, or maybe they're drinking wine, they're doing sugars that are going to totally raise their glucose levels. So the reason why that's important is we want to avoid having rapid rise in blood sugar, which is also called insulin abuse, because it makes that insulin continually produced to try to take care of that sugar. The most important reason why we don't want that to happen is because it affects those capillary beds. It affects those limbs, those toes and those feet, years before we even know that's going on. And so circulation is going to be very limited in the toes and the feet. So later on in life, when you develop diabetes, unfortunately, what happens to most diabetics? They end up getting their toes cut off or their feet cut off, because the insulin can't get there to take care of the glucose. And that happened 25 years before they even knew they were getting diabetes. So that's the most important thing that we want to learn about this rapid rise in blood sugar. So things to remember that are going to be very important. We want to, there are about 9 things that we want to do, and we want to make sure that we are incorporating this in our diets. We want to make sure that we're doing good fats and not bad fats. So that's going to be, our good fats are going to be your olive oil, your coconut oil, flaxseed oil. Those are going to be your good oils. Low glycemic meals. We want to make sure that we don't do foods that are high in carbs, like your pastas and your white rice. We want to make sure that we don't spike our blood sugar, because this will increase the glucogen, and it will also increase our fat hormones, is what it does. You can also go to www.healthyandleanforlife.com. I'll repeat that. It's www.healthyandleanforlife.com. And Dr. Strand will help you with diets, and there's probably recipes on there. There's recipes in his book also. But he helps you so that you can look at also the low glycemic meals that you're going to want to do. People who already have higher triglycerides, who have higher cholesterol, we know that they're also going to usually have lower HDL than what we want to have. So for women, the HDL needs to be 50, for men it's 40. So if the triglycerides and cholesterol are starting to climb and the HDL is starting to go down, that's an indication that we are beginning to have metabolic syndrome. In a class I just did this weekend, a seminar that I had, the endocrinologist that spoke said that we want to make sure that our blood sugar is below 85. So when you get your glucose levels checked, usually they say that 90 is fine, 100, they start to, consider that an issue. But this endocrinologist said the new research is saying below 85. So if you've had your blood sugar tested recently and it is above 90, then what Dr. Strand says in his book Healthy for Life, and he's a medical doctor who has studied metabolic syndrome for years, what he says is that you have to go 12 weeks before you have any grain. So that means eliminating grains for 12 weeks. And he says by then your craving for these grains will go away. It will stop. He said no breads, flour, sugar, cereals, pasta, rice, or potatoes for 12 weeks if your triglycerides are high, cholesterol is high, HDL is lower than it should be, and glucose is above 85. Then he also talks about making sure that we get cold water fish, making sure that we get our poultry, veggies, nuts, beans, your good fats. Those are going to be very important. Exercise, starting with 30 minutes of brisk walking daily. And you want to work up to 45 minutes 5 days per week. And what that will do is it will get rid of those glucose stores, and it will start diminishing the glucose that is causing the fat cells. And that's what we want to do. The muscles are going to absorb that glucose, the liver and the fat cells, the adipose tissue will absorb the glucose first and then store it as fat. So by exercising, we're actually diminishing that extra supply of glucose. We want to make sure if we do any supplements, we do high quality supplements. We want to make sure we hydrate. And when we say hydrate, that means you take your weight, you divide it in half, and that's how many ounces of water you're supposed to get a day. So the ounces of water should equal half your weight in ounces, okay? Never, never, never go hungry. We want to eat at least 3 meals a day. Breakfast is the most important meal because we have fasted all night long. And if we don't want our blood sugar to go up and down and wear out the pancreas, we want to make sure that we eat breakfast. Or, as I do, I always have a fruit shake in the morning with fiber in it, with my flax seeds or chia seeds. So 3 meals a day, 2 low glycemic snacks per day. So you can have that snack between breakfast and lunch. And then the most important snack is going to be between lunch and dinner. So that is going to be the 9 things we want to make sure that we're doing. Number 1, good fat. Number 2, low glycemic meals. Number 3, don't spike your blood sugar. Number 4, no breads, flour, sugar, cereal, pasta, rice, or potatoes for 12 weeks if our triglycerides and cholesterol are higher than they should be, and our glucose is above 85, and also if our HDL is below 50 if we're a woman, 40 if we're a man. Number 5, we want to make sure we're getting good fats and proteins, veggies, nuts, beans, cold water fish, and fowl. That's our poultry. Exercise starting out at 30 minutes. We want to do a brisk walk daily, and then we want to work up to 45 minutes 5 days a week. Number 7, high quality supplements. Number 8, hydrate. Number 9, never, never go hungry. 3 meals a day, 2 snacks. And that concludes today's